Nicholas Coppel is the author of a new book called Myanmar's Digital Coup, How the World Responded, which came out in July through Palgrave Macmillan. Nicholas was Australia's ambassador to Myanmar from 2015 to 2018, and he is currently the president of the Australian Myanmar Institute. Thanks for coming on the Hembury Books Podcast, Nicholas.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Could we please begin by explaining the current situation in Myanmar and what has led to such a tragic state of affairs?
Well, Myanmar had elections in 2020 and the government of Aung San Suu Kyi won those resoundingly. And in Myanmar, which is a bit like the United States in the sense that they have elections on one certain date and then the government is formed a number of months later. Well, it was when that government was about to be formed in February, the 1st of February 2021, when the military decided to mount a coup. They thought they'd get away with it. They've got away with it in the past. The military has run Myanmar for decades. But on this occasion, the population, the people of Myanmar, took the streets in very large numbers and resisted the coup. And it has continued. And when the military decided to use violent means to suppress popular protest, the people took to other actions. People defense forces were formed and resistance movements joined up with ethnic armed organizations, which have been in on and off conflict with the Myanmar military for many decades. And that's the situation we face today, where much of the country is contested. The resistance forces, the combination of ethnic armed groups and people's defense forces, have had significant military gains and are posing a real threat to Myanmar's military. But neither side wants to step down, if you like, or to negotiate. So the outlook is for further conflict and further suffering for many people in Myanmar.
It's just so heartbreaking to watch, isn't it? After all the reforms that were made.
Indeed, and many of those reforms, though, the military de facto junta has reversed. A lot of the economic reforms have been turned back. Obviously, the freedoms, the press freedom, the internet freedom, have all been severely restricted. So it's been a significant reversal. And indeed, the economy is showing that. It's gone backwards. Standard of living has collapsed. Inflation is soaring. Access to basic commodities, access to foreign exchange are all extremely difficult.
No, it's terrible. So what prompted you to write Myanmar's Digital Coup? And can you tell us about the book's central argument?
Well, what prompted me to write about it is the response of many people around the world to the coup. I felt was very encouraging, very uplifting at one level. But on another, I felt that they were often missing the target and not being as effective as they need to be. So I thought it'd be useful to write a book which looks specifically at how the world has responded to the coup, rather than about the coup itself. So I look at, for example, the United Nations and its many statements of condemnation, a Security Council resolution, and the United Nations has come in for criticism. The people of Myanmar wanted the United Nations to save Myanmar. So it looks at the question of, well, what can the United Nations do in situations such as this? And I look at the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Again, it was quite early on where it convened a meeting of its leaders, including the military commander, and reached an agreement on a pathway forward, which hasn't been implemented. But it too, ASEAN was criticized by many people for what it did, and it wasn't considered a satisfactory response. There's been a lot of attention on the international business community and its response to the coup, and indeed pressure on many businesses to withdraw from Myanmar. And I look at this whole question, this question of sanctions. The world that today doesn't apply general sanctions, targeting the whole country, at least not in the case of Myanmar, because of the damage it does, the harm it does to the people. In this case, it's very much about targeted sanctions, so-called smart sanctions, which identify leaders, but also the business interests and their business interests and state-owned enterprises and things like that. And I look at those calls and ask the question of, are these effective? What do they do? And then I also look at the response of the humanitarian sector, the development partners of Myanmar, and how they've switched from providing assistance, which traditionally has been focused on building up the capacity of Myanmar's institutions to help address Myanmar's problems. Well, the donors don't want to work with the junta, so they've switched to providing primarily humanitarian assistance through the multilateral partners, the UN agencies, for example. And that too has come in for criticism. I look at all the responses to the coup and assess whether they're effective and whether they're reasonable, and also make recommendations on how the rest of the world outside of Myanmar, can help the people of Myanmar achieve what they're striving for, which is a federal democratic union.
Is it extra complicated because, unlike, say, the Ukraine, which is a sovereign nation that Russia has invaded, with Myanmar, it's a military, it's an internal situation where they've overthrown a democratic government? Does that make it harder for other countries to do as much as they might like?
It does. And it also, there's been a lot of comparisons with the world's response to Ukraine compared with the response to Myanmar. And many question, why is the world outraged and taking action against Russia when they're not so concerned about Myanmar? But they are, as you point out, very different. In the case of Russia and Ukraine, it's a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, a nuclear armed power, which has invaded the territory of a neighboring country and sought to throw its weight around and challenge those internationally agreed borders. In the case of Myanmar, it's an internal coup, not unlike many coups which have happened in the last few years, particularly in Africa. So the response, or the comparison indeed, should probably be with the countries of Africa rather than with Ukraine.
Do you overall, do you feel that the world's reaction to Myanmar has been lackluster, lacking, deficient?
I don't think it's lackluster. We've seen the United Nations Security Council, for example, has passed a resolution. It's the first time that the Security Council has passed a resolution on Myanmar, despite Myanmar's very tortured and difficult history and many issues of outrage that have happened, including, the forced exile of over 700,000 Rohingya Muslims. No Security Council resolution relating to that event, a tragic event, which continues today. They're in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh many years later, 2017 now. 7 years later, they're still suffering there. So it's been more in that sense. ASEAN too, which has come in for a lot of criticism. It's often said that ASEAN doesn't interfere in the internal affairs of its member states, but it's certainly taking strong measures and speaking loudly about what's happening in Myanmar. So it's prepared to put aside that principle about ASEAN to address the more fundamental questions of human rights in Myanmar. So, to be sure, none of these actions have resulted in change within Myanmar, but I think it does show that the world does care. The world is prepared to do things, and it is prepared to show its support to the people of Myanmar who are trying to challenge this junta.
It must have been an incredibly large research undertaking, and I wondered whether it was difficult to research with Myanmar effectively cut off from the world once again, and people fearing retribution for speaking out against the military. Did you have those kinds of challenges, or were you more looking, because the focus is on the global response?
Well, you're quite right. They are very real challenges. Added to that is that I do not speak or read Myanmar. So my ability to follow closely what's happening on the ground is impaired by that as well. So for all those reasons, the study very much is about not what's happening so much in Myanmar as what's the rest of the world has responded to Myanmar. So the research is basically being conducted outside, and indeed is largely documentary, and the evidence is based on what people have said, what institutions have done, the actions and the statements coming out of a lot of concerned organizations and individuals as well. So it's an assessment of all that data, that's the research material, rather than interviews within Myanmar.
Wow. So just in terms of someone who might be approaching a similar type of project, would you identified the people you wanted to speak to, and you would then write to them, say, I'm writing a book. Did you have a publisher at that point? And have you got time for an interview, that sort of approach?
It was a little bit different. We started, because it's been co-authored with Associate Professor Leonard Chang from Deakin University. And we put forward a book proposal, a rather detailed one, several thousand words, to the publisher.
Mm-hmm.
The publishers then put it out to peer review. Just the proposal was put out to peer review, and comments were received. We adjusted the proposal accordingly because there's some useful comments there, and then signed a contract with the publisher. So that up front before we'd written the book. But we had worked out the structure of the book, what it is that we wanted to research and prepare.
I see. Okay. Can you tell me what is a monograph, and what's academic publishing like? I don't have any experience of it.
Well, a monograph is a fancy word, if you like, for a book on a single subject, but it's usually used in the context of academic publications. And indeed, our publishers, Palgrave Macmillan, are academic publishers. So that's a monograph.
That's a monograph. And how long was the sort of from conception of you two sitting down together and saying, let's do this, to the day that the book is available on online retailers and in the world?
Well, it's just over 2 years, 2 and a bit years.
Wow, I think that's quite short.
It's short, but it's a book which runs the risk of becoming dated if it doesn't come out quick.
Of course, yes, of course.
Because the intensity of the world's response to the coup in Myanmar is greatest after it happened.
Mm.
And it's diminished over the passage of time as people normalize or come to accept that there's been a coup and there's not much more what we can do about it.
Yes, of course.
And part of the purpose of the book is to keep that focus on Myanmar, because the coup isn't over. It's still being challenged, and challenged with success.
So how long did the research and writing component take?
The research and writing was probably a couple of years. Once we submitted the manuscript to the publishers again send it out to other academics. It's a blind review, so we don't know who they are for comment. So the publishers are wanting to know that others who are active in this field, other academics who are busy in this field, feel that it's a book that's worthy of publication, that it's got something new that's being said, and the response or the comments that come back from that blind peer review are then sent to us, and we're asked to consider those. And indeed, comments we received were very encouraging, very positive, but also there were some very useful points which we took on board. So those had to be incorporated. So it was another couple of months of drafting when we received those comments. But there is a bit of a gap that comes from the point when we submit the original manuscript to when we receive those peer review comments, and of several months. I think it was about 4 or 5 months. So it's an anxious period where we're waiting to hear the responses and getting anxious that it's been delayed a little bit. But in the end, it's come out. And
I can imagine, because with the peer, so in theory, a book could be completed but not published if it doesn't pass muster.
Sure.
Wow, I did not know that.
Normally, the normal response would be to rewrite.
To
I mean, the
fix it.
publisher would ask the authors to rewrite, but that didn't happen in our case. There was more suggestions for us to consider.
Okay. Now, I was looking at your book before, while researching the questions, and I saw the retail price is $209, which is really quite standard for academic books. Can you shed some light on why there is a higher price point for academic books?
Well, they're much smaller print runs. I mean, I don't want to be in the position actually of having to defend these very high prices, because they are indeed high. And I bought a number of academic books in the researching our one, because we do need to situate it within the existing literature as part of the academic process. And it was written during the period of COVID, so access to libraries was rather limited. So anyway, we bought a number of academic books, and I'm very conscious of the cost.
Yeah,
but they are small print runs, and
so it's a print run. Okay, yeah.
They're usually sold to institutions, libraries, and the experts in the field who also want to build up their particular, their private libraries in the field.
And it reflects the enormity of research and dedication and your expertise, that go into academic books as well.
Well, I don't think that's reflected in the price, because we're not paid for all the work, So, but it's while it's an academic publisher, I mean, in fact, the comment which appears on the back cover of the book is that it's more a book for the policy people and practitioners in the field, rather than exclusively for academics. It's got a very real world focus to it, and it's a timely book for those who are trying to work out, what's to be done about the situation in Myanmar.
Digital, it's available with academic books. Do they do ebooks as well?
Yes, so you can order an electronic copy of the book at a significantly reduced price compared with the hardback price. Okay.
What are the main opportunities for promoting an academic book? Like, is the focus on kind of speaking opportunities and universities and that sort of thing?
Yes, speaking at conferences, at universities, webinars, podcasts, things like that. It's not the sort where you go to a bookshop and do signings, because it's not sold through bookshops. It's primarily sold online. So it's very targeted to the sorts of people and institutions that would be interested in the book, rather than mass distribution. Yeah,
it is. It's a different audience. So the way of finding your readers would be a completely different strategy for other types of nonfiction, I think.
Yes, but we also use social media, particularly the professional social media, like LinkedIn, for example, is quite a valuable tool.
It is. That is how I learnt of it, and I was very excited. Shot you an invitation. How did you split the co-writing responsibilities with Lennon Y.C. Chang? Did you write separate chapters, or how did you go about it?
Yes, well, Lennon's background is as a criminologist with a particular focus on cybercrime and cybersecurity. And indeed, we've co-authored academic journal articles together about building Myanmar's cyber security awareness. So we're experienced in that, and he has a particular background or particular knowledge of cybersecurity issues in Myanmar, having spent quite a bit of time there and working with the local cybersecurity industry as well. So one of the features of Myanmar's coup has been the use of modern technology. So that's why we call it Myanmar's digital coup. It's been used in multiple ways. I mean, the obvious one, of course, is spreading news and information and organizing people right throughout the country. Previous responses to military aggression in Myanmar have been largely confined to Yangon, the main city, and to some extent Mandalay as well. But one of the features of this coup is it's right throughout the country, from top to bottom, people have been mobilized. And there's no doubt that modern communications, the digital era, has facilitated that. So we wanted to look at that aspect of it. But it's also been more than that. It's also been very much a feature of how the world has responded to the coup. Digital finance, for example, the ability to transfer funds electronically, digitally within the country and internationally, has been used to raise money for the civil disobedience movement. That involves a lot of public servants walking off their jobs and then no longer being paid. So raising funds to support them, plus supporting for the government in exile, the National Unity Government as well, and for it to be providing alternative services. So fundraising has been a key part, and using digital technologies has been central to that as well. So it's been a key feature. I think the mobilization and indeed providing awareness of what's happening in real time has been very important. The media, independent media, has been shut down within Myanmar, but getting the news out, getting the story out, has been very much about, if you like, citizen journalists posting videos, posting things recorded on phones and sent to the rest of the world, so we know what's happening in Myanmar. And this is important not just for the knowledge, but it's also important in the collection of evidence. There are groups which are collecting, this sort of data, being able to verify it through date stamping, through geo positioning, to locate precisely what's been happening and trying to identify it, trying to record it, so that hopefully justice will be able to be brought to the perpetrators of this violence in the future. But what's important today is for that evidence to be collected, for it to be verified, and for it to be stored so that it can be used in the future. So the digital world, the digital economy, has been a defining feature of this coup compared with the three.
Just the previous ones. A friend of mine who fled Myanmar received a Facebook message from military intelligence saying, "Where are you? We're looking for you, report here," type thing. I mean, their tactics they're also trying to leverage it, aren't they?
Well, that's right. It's equally the junta is using technology to advance its interests. It has adopted measures, for example, when it's about to launch a major airstrikes on villages and things of that sort, it shuts down the internet in that area. So people both can't be aware of it, but also it prevents images being uploaded and broadcast to the world.
I didn't know that. That's awful. Yeah.
Once they're filmed, people can upload them at some
later
point
on.
If they survive the attacks.
Yeah. Gee. Could you tell us about your posting as Australia's ambassador to Myanmar from 2015 to 2018? Because I had some time at the British Embassy and I just found it dreamy and so glamorous and fascinating. And, what was it like being in the ambassador? It's such an interesting country.
What an interesting country, and also at a very interesting time. So I was there for the elections in 2015, which ushered in the National League for Democracy government. That's the government of Aung San Suu Kyi. And indeed, there was uncertainty then that the military would let go and transfer power to her and her government, but they did, and that ushered in this new era, an era of further reforms. Some reforms that were initiated under the previous military civilian government, but these took on a new level of enthusiasm and vigor, and we saw all sorts of reforms taking place, both political and economic. So it was a time of great optimism, and we saw also the response of the international community, flooding in. The number of diplomatic missions, for example, number of countries with embassies in Myanmar more than doubled. International organizations expanded their programs. Donor agencies stepped up in a very significant way to support the reform programs and to build up the capacity of a bureaucracy which had for so many decades just been taking orders and not providing frank advice to ministers, and indeed was quite moribund. So there's a lot of work to be done, and indeed the capacity of those institutions, because they were so limited, meant that many of these reforms didn't go as far or as fast as would have been, we would have liked, as everyone would have liked, the people of Myanmar would have liked. But turning around the cultures in organizations, building up the capacity of the employees is a long-term challenge. And indeed, 5 years was not enough.
Mm.
But nevertheless, because all these efforts were underway, it was a very interesting time and very exciting time. Australia had a very large development assistance program, largely focused on the education sector, but also supporting the peace process. And other donors focused on health and some on infrastructure. It was a challenge also to then start coordinating amongst the donors so they're not tripping over each other. And the government saw the need for this and established a donor coordination mechanism as well. So, all the enthusiasm is great, but it also creates its new problems and challenges, and then you have to create solutions to those as well. So it's a very exciting time. The number of visitors as well. I mean, world leaders were pouring into the country.
They were.
International businesses were pouring in as well to see what new opportunities were being created. So there was a lot happening.
There was, you've been a career diplomat for over 30 years. You've been posted in many countries, but it was Myanmar that you fell in love with, and that your ongoing focus remains on Myanmar.
Yes. It also was my longest posting. I had 4 years there, so it's from the start of 2015 to the end of 2018. But it's a country which does get under your skin in a very positive sense, where you feel an extraordinary empathy for the people, people who have suffered so much for so long, and yet are still a very generous and a very kind population, generally speaking. We saw also the horrors of what happened to the Rohingya community, and indeed the inability of many within Myanmar to speak out against that, which was very disappointing. But at the personal level, one-on-one, are people who have suffered much and yet still continue. And it sort of draws you in the sense that you seek to find ways of contributing yourself to improving a country which is very fractured and has had a very difficult history and a very difficult present and a future which is still very uncertain.
Mm-hmm. How can people, if someone watching would like to help the people of Myanmar, what are some of the ways that they can do that?
Well, there are multiple ways. I mean, I think an important one is to remain aware and stay abreast of what's happening in the country. I think that's important. But there are also many non-government organizations, NGOs, charities who are providing assistance. A lot of that is happening, particularly on the border areas. The border between Thailand and Myanmar runs for over 2,000 kilometers. And there are a number of organizations, many centered in Mae Sot in Thailand, for example, who are providing education, health care. But there are also a couple of universities that have virtual universities that have opened up, providing online education to Myanmar students whose education has been interrupted by the coup. So there are a number of opportunities. The UN agencies, the International Red Cross, are all providing assistance to Myanmar. So I think individuals can choose their favorite charity, if you like, and support it.
Yeah, that's terrific. Okay. You're the president of the Australian Myanmar Institute. How have its activities and purpose changed since the coup of 2021?
Well, they've changed a lot. I mean, I've been involved as its president only for 1 year. But prior to that, in its early days, it was very much focused on promoting academic exchanges between Australia and Myanmar. And to support that, it hosted conferences in Myanmar and also in Australia on bringing together academic communities from both countries. With COVID and then the coup, that type of activity has not been possible. And instead, it's been focused in recent years on hosting webinars, which are held every month. And they try to get a Myanmar speaker and an Australian speaker, not always from an academic background, but people talking about contemporary issues, whether it's the healthcare sector, whether it's education, whether about the situation of the Rohingya, the peace process, the economy, whatever. It's each month it's a different topic. And the webinars have proved to be quite much like your podcasts, quite good in the sense that people can watch them from wherever they are in the world at any time that's convenient to them. So we obviously have a live audience, but also they are then put up on our website for people to see.
Okay. Do you remain hopeful that better days lie ahead for the people of Myanmar?
I'm more hopeful, I think, than after previous coups. I think the response of the people of Myanmar is much more resolute, much more determined and forceful than it has been before. The gains that they've been making are significant military gains, and it's clearly not a successful coup. And indeed, many people use the term attempted coup, not even giving it the term coup, which suggests that it has happened. So not too sure where you land on that one, but it is indicative of the fact that the situation is not yet settled. And indeed, the resistance to the coup is growing by the month. The capacity of the military to run the country is getting weaker and weaker, and that's becoming more and more evident. So I think it seems inevitable that there will be change. We don't know where, and we don't know when, and we don't know how. But I think it's likely. I suspect it's going to require some change within Myanmar's military leadership. The current leader is a very stubborn individual. I don't think he will admit defeat or concede defeat. So his removal is going to be essential to what comes next.
Yes, that would be a happy day for the people of Myanmar. They would be dancing on the streets, I can imagine. Thanks so much, Nicholas. And thank you also for reviewing my book, Our Home in Myanmar, for the Australian Book Review. That was very exciting for me to read a review by someone so knowledgeable as yourself. And thank you very much for coming on the podcast, and congratulations on your book. Where can people find your book?
The easiest way, if someone would like to get a copy of the book, is to Google Myanmar's Digital Coup, How the World Responded, and that will take you straight to the link to the publisher, and it can be purchased online.
Terrific. Thanks very much. Do you have a website?
Not a personal website, no.
Yeah. People can find you on LinkedIn if they would like to get in touch with the Australian Myanmar Institute as well.
Yeah, the Australian Myanmar Institute has a website, but it's the Institute's website rather than my own.
Yeah, sure. Okay, fantastic. Thanks again, Nicholas.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.